What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Upper Hand Fantasy Podcast. This is Faraz Siddiqui. I'm here with Zach Rizzuto. Pretty good Sunday, I would say. Me and Zach are both kind of we're more excited than usual. We're definitely more excited than we were coming into this week because there was 6 teams on bye. We didn't have a chance. We thought we didn't have a chance in a few leagues, but we ended up coming through bigger than expected for a lot of these players. So it worked out. Thank you to all the players who came through when you normally don't. We appreciate you. This is the week that we needed you. Okay. And one of those guys, well, maybe not one of the guys that, for me personally, like, in our Superflex league, I started Gardner Minshew.
Yeah.
And I was not feeling that at all. Right? Like
against the Browns.
Cleveland.
Yeah.
Come on, dude. Like the best, and honestly, like the Browns defense showed why they're a dominant defense, right? Like in this game. But Gardner Minshew had these moments, man. You know what I'm saying? So like it was really cool to see him rushing the ball in, him getting those big, that big touchdown to Michael Pittman late, Josh Downs, the big touchdown to him. Like it was cool, man. It was cool to see that because it seems like Gardner Minshew kind of is breathing new life into this team a little bit. After Anthony Richardson went down, and they kind of needed that. And now, they're going to be in contention, for at least the next few games. They're going to think that they could potentially make the playoffs. So that's good, because anybody you have on this team, like Pittman, Jonathan Taylor, Gardner Minshew for me in the Superflex League, Josh Downs now, these guys are now, this is a team that's going to be fighting, and that's what you want.
Yeah, absolutely. I loved it. Like when he ran in those 2 touchdowns, I think it was early, and he did the shimmy after both of them. That was like his thing for the day. It was great. And they were wearing the Indiana Knights uniforms. It was like the Minshew magic was back. And I'm a guy, I think Minshew's pretty good. I think he's a backup a lot of times when there are plenty of teams that he could start for. Like he's been a backup. I think he's one of the best backups, obviously. Easy to say after performance like today, but just in general, I don't think he gets enough love. And he did a really good job against the Browns. Like you said, you weren't expecting anything. That's part of what made it just so sweet when you had him in your lineup. And I'm happy as long as I'm not playing against you when you have Gardner Minshew in your lineup today. Like if I were playing against you today, I wouldn't be like joining you and reveling in this success. But I didn't play against you today, so I'm fine with it. It's Gardner Minshew, it was just great.
It was kind of hilarious, to be honest with you, because like this is not. It was something that nobody. People have. I probably ranked Gardner Minshew as like maybe 5th ranked quarterback for today. You know what I'm saying, coming into the week because the matchup was so terrible.
It was bad.
Was not optimistic at all. But another guy who had a huge day. Listen, top 2 quarterbacks for the week, huh? Gardner Minshew and this other guy, Lamar Jackson, huge day. The Lions defense had no answer for him. 347 yards passing, 3 passing touchdowns, and a rushing touchdown as well. So he'll likely finish as a QB1 this week. But we still have Jalen Hurts and Tua to go tonight. But he's now had 5 QB1 finishes in 7 weeks, 3 top 5 finishes as well. And this offense, they haven't really hit their peak, right, this season. I think today was kind of the closest thing to it. And it was really good to see.
Yeah, and it was against a defense that we didn't really expect it against. Like, I thought this was going to be like some super competitive game, and you know that it's supposed to be a good game when Fox puts Kevin Burkhardt and Greg Olsen on the game, and they're calling it, And they just got a complete no-show from the Lions. I didn't expect this at all. But, Lamar Jackson, you mentioned that it looks like the offense it didn't hit its peak this season, but you said it's as close as it's been to doing that. Look at the players that were involved. Zay Flowers was involved. Mark Andrews was involved. Odell Beckham Jr. suddenly, he looked good. Obviously, he was not a huge target guy. We're not expecting him to be a consistent contributor, but he looked good. He was part of the offense. And so was Rashad Bateman. He caught a couple passes. Like the box score didn't tell you just how good this offense was and how it was clicking on all cylinders. Gus Edwards had his big game, an 80-yard catch. Everything was going the Ravens' way today. So Lamar Jackson, this is the type of ceiling that we've come accustomed to seeing from him, and I think he can keep doing that because it looks like the Todd Monken effect is in full effect because we're seeing him pass the ball more. You mentioned, obviously, 347 pass yards. It's easy to say, oh, yeah, he's passing the ball more. This looks like Todd Monken. But this has been the whole season. The offense looks much better than it did last season and the year before. It's a big change, and that's a big reason why like you said, he's had so many QB1 finishes this week, and it's just going to keep happening.
Yeah, man. And on the other side of the ball, Jahmyr Gibbs finally showing us why he's that dude, right? 87% of snaps in this one. That could have been a result of Craig Reynolds being a little bit banged up coming into this game. He could have taken a little bit of that early down work and maybe that goal line snap that Jahmyr Gibbs saw, in today's game. But, he's capable of being an effective runner, right? 11 for 68. He had that garbage time touchdown, which it counts for fantasy. He also commanded 10 targets as well, 9 for 58. So that's what you want to see, man. We finally saw him being used as a receiver, right, consistently, right? And he could finish as a top 5 running back this week based on what happens the rest of the way. But, and this is going to be everyone's question now, Zach, right? Obviously, David Montgomery banged up. He's not on IR. He'll be back at some point in the next couple of games. So everyone's going to be asking, do we sell, right? He has another solid matchup against the Raiders next week, but what do we do here?
So as someone that's got, I have a lot of draft capital tied up in him this season. I'm definitely going to cling to this performance as like vindication for investing in as much as I did in him. And I'm sure that's going to be the case for a lot of his managers too this week. And he stuck it out while he was injured. He didn't have tons of production. Now he finally comes through and you almost don't know what to do. But I think there's definitely some merit to the idea of selling him. We're coming up on the midway point in the season, and the only time Gibbs delivered, which was today, it was in a game where Dave Montgomery wasn't playing. Craig Reynolds wasn't healthy. He had a couple carries, but he was questionable coming into the game. And the Lions just got completely boat raced. Now, the point about that, the game script not being, something we're going to see every week, it's not as big of a concern for me as it is the fact that his competition in the backfield just wasn't there to compete with him, that being Craig Reynolds and Dave Montgomery. So I think, of course, his workload increased because of that. And you can't really pay too much attention to that because it's not going to be that way every week. I think there's a situation where Gibbs could catch 6 or 7 passes, even with Montgomery in the lineup down the line once they're both back and healthy. But that's the problem. Like, those games aren't going to happen nearly as often, I think, as games like we've seen from him these first few weeks. And it's pretty clear that David Montgomery's a running back that the Lions want to have on the field when he can play. Like, we can cling to Jahmyr Gibbs. That was part of, our discussion. What we liked so much about Gibbs was that he could have that receiving upside to go along with some work in the ground game. We weren't expecting Dave Montgomery to just dominate those snaps. That's been the case. I definitely field offers for Gibbs at this point. I don't know if I'd go around shopping him because we know that Gibbs can do this. This was like the first time we've seen this performance. We know it can happen again. But I'm not going to go and be like throwing him out as a piece in a bunch of different deals trying to get rid of him, because you've probably been waiting on this performance like I was, and I want to hold on to him because I know the talent is there. I'm not worried about him for Dynasty. Like, this is a completely different conversation. We're talking about redraft right here, right now. But I'd throw him on the trade block and just let everyone know that you're willing to listen to trade offers. But if nobody bites and you're not going to get solid compensation, I just roll with him for another week. Like you mentioned, there's that good matchup coming up. The chance he could be even more valuable a week from today than he is now. And at that point, we could be talking about him being a quality piece moving forward, somebody that you keep on your team. But I think the bottom line is there's nothing wrong with looking to sell right now. And if you can get decent compensation back for him, where you say, all right, I'm not going to be losing out on any potential that Jahmyr Gibbs has, I would pull the trigger because Dave Montgomery is going to come back and be part of the backfield, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, and if Montgomery were to miss any more time, we know that Gibbs can handle a big workload. We know that he'll be involved in the receiving game, and that's what you want to see. The hope that I have is that, okay, cool. Like, Gibbs was able to show what he showed today. You know what I mean? Like, this is kind of the opportunity that he needed to at least show coaches what he's capable of in a real NFL game. He hasn't had that opportunity yet, right? So he hasn't had that consistent, like, hey, look what I can do, coaches, right? And he had that today, and I think he passed with flying colors, right? He's going to have that next week, and he could potentially pass with flying colors again. And then now what do we have when Montgomery comes back? Right, we potentially have a situation where Montgomery isn't just going to be the only guy that you can start on the Lions when he's healthy, right, in that backfield. Right now, you could potentially, start Gibbs in a capacity that we knew that Montgomery was going to be the primary runner in this offense before the season, right, and that could continue. But if Gibbs can do something like he did today in terms of, turning those. Turning this opportunity that he had into more playing time and into more routes run moving forward, potentially being the primary passing down back, like, that's what I want. And that there is that upside for that to happen. Am I reaching a little bit right now? No, I'm just saying that that is a possibility, right? So there is a little bit of silver lining from these type of performances. I don't think he just goes back into the same exact role that he was early on before Montgomery was hurt, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I hear you. And I just unfortunately I'm not gonna take away from what you said. What you said makes sense. I agree. But a lot of times what we see making sense and what we agree on isn't what the
It might not
coaches
happen.
want to say. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like
Yep.
we say this all the time with a bunch of players. We said this with DeAndre Swift pretty much every time last year. It's like, well, he had this game, he showed what he can do. Maybe he'll get that workload. No. The Lions coaching staff has proven they're pretty stubborn when it comes to this kind of thing. I want to say that yes, Jahmyr Gibbs showed what he could do, but I'm also looking at it as I thought he had that performance where he's like, hey, look what I can do in week one. When he had 6 missed tackles, forced, that kind of thing. And not to get too much into stats, but just like he looked ridiculously good in week one on very, very limited snaps. So I was expecting him to be to a point where he has all this work, at least a solid workload, something close to like what we saw today, just by virtue of that performance alone. But that hasn't been the case. So like, I agree with you. That is an ideal outcome, but I'm kind of hedging on that a little bit because I don't think that that's going to necessarily be the case when he comes back. I think Dave Montgomery comes back and it's just going to go back to be like, well, what do we do with Gibbs? You're just going to sit there and be like, I'm going to start him because I have him. I spent so much on him in drafts, but you're not ever going to be like really happy with it unless he gets that 6 or 7 target upside, like I said, 6 or 7 catches. And I think that's definitely in the equation, something we could see, but it's just not going to be consistent enough where you're happy with him every week.
If I can get a legit fantasy option for Gibbs, I would do it, right? Because, you know, what I'm talking about is a potential situation, right? Like kind of like, close to best case scenario, right? With David Montgomery healthy. So are you going to wait on and hope for the best case scenario? Or do you want to potentially get some sure things in your lineup that you can depend on every single week? Gibbs, you might not be able to, right?
And that's the
So,
issue. Yep.
yeah, exactly, exactly. And by the way, Jameson Williams, he did have a bigger role this week. He ran around on 44% of dropbacks. Believe it or not, that was higher than last week. So it seems as though his role is growing slowly. He was targeted 6 times. So that comes out to 23% targets per route run. So that's a solid number. That's what you want to see. Amon-Ra, though, he was targeted 19 times in this game. Uh, Absolute stud.
It's hilarious.
Moving to the Bears game, Brian Hoyer started for the Raiders. Aiden O'Connell's ended the game because they were terrible. Both Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers ended up getting that top-heavy target distribution that we saw from Jimmy G. 12 and 13 targets for them, respectively. Myers ended up with the better fantasy day because of the garbage time touchdown late from O'Connell. But Devontae continues to be a buy low, I think. Jimmy G is expected back next week. He's going to get his targets. This is going to balance out at some point. Like, he's annoyed that he's not getting the targets. He's annoyed that he's losing. The Raiders aren't going to trade him. I think he's going to be just fine.
Yeah, I think he's going to be fine too. And realistically, you can't take a whole lot from this game. You can't step back from this game and be like, Devontae Adams had another quiet week. Well, we can't trust him anymore. He's not the same guy. Jacoby Myers is a guy. Jacoby Myers is good. I'll give you that. He's good. But there's no reason to panic about Devontae Adams still because he was hyper-targeted to start the game. He just got quiet. And then after that, it was just a mess of a game. But that was the type of usage that we were hoping to see. And thankfully, hopefully, it won't be Brian Hoyer and Aiden O'Connell starting every single week. Jimmy G will come back, and everybody's going to look better just because Jimmy G is a much better quarterback than Brian Hoyer or Aiden O'Connell. I'm not worried about him at all either. I think that buying him still makes a ton of sense. And the fact that he now has this many games quiet, like whoever's holding on to him right now might be pretty inclined to move him at this point and just say, I need to cut my losses here. So I think he's only done you favors, Devontae Adams, if you want to buy him. If you're on the outside looking in thinking, I want to get some Devontae Adams shares, he has done you favors, and he's going to be much easier to get, even after this week than he was earlier before this game, and he was pretty easy to get then too, I would say.
Yeah, no, I would say so as well. And here's the other problem, though, right? Josh Jacobs has had a bunch of good matchups this year. Pretty much all his matchups were on the good side, I'd say. He's had 2 top 10 finishes this year against the Chargers and then the Packers, but he's been top 20 or worse, or he's been outside the top 20, I should say, in every other game. He has the Lions next week in Detroit. Not a good matchup. So what are we doing with Josh Jacobs now?
I mean, at this point, I'd say we just have to eat our vegetables with Josh Jacobs because that's just about what it's felt like having him in your starting lineup every week, right? Like 7 weeks in the season, nobody's excited to have him in their lineup. Nobody's excited to have vegetables at dinner. It's understandable why nobody's excited about him. He's really got us cornered from what we've seen so far from him this season. Like his production hasn't been anything close to what we came to expect to see from him since last year, but his utilization really isn't all that bad either. So it's like it's balancing out a little bit. 16.8 expected fantasy points per game coming into this one, ninth in the NFL among all running backs in that stat. Today he had a workload that wasn't that bad. It was just the game script in this one and the trouble at quarterback. You can't really fault him for it. They go down early and they can't do anything on offense. They're not going to be running the ball. That's just not how the game works. Especially when you have, like you mentioned, Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers combining for 25 targets from backup quarterbacks. It's just not a formula for success. But that being said, nobody's going to be feeling bad for him or you. Nobody's going to say, oh, I want to trade for him. You're almost guaranteed to be taking a loss in any deal where you're shipping him away. So to follow up on the analogy earlier, I think we just have to continue to sit at the dinner table and be served up the carrots and green beans that's been Josh Jacobs this season. You have to hold him. There's a better chance that he can turn things around this season than there is in you being able to flip him in a trade for something better. I think we can start talking about him as more of an ideal RB2 start than a low RB1 start. That's kind of where I've had him in rankings. I think I'm going to start moving him down a little bit this way the offense looks. But there's plenty of football left. And like I mentioned, I think you just have to hold him because at this point, no one's buying him. And you're not really going to get anything from not starting him because he's going to have his weeks. It's just at this point, it's almost like the guy we just talked about, Jahmyr Gibbs. He's leaving you out to dry pretty much most weeks, but those highs that he has, they'll win you your week. So I think he's an ideal RB2 start at this point. Maybe not perfectly ideal, but I think at this point, what you spent on him, putting him in your RB2 spot, isn't that bad. I'm not expecting RB1 numbers from him on a weekly basis anymore.
I don't have anything to add to that. I agree with pretty much everything you said. So
it's such a good feeling.
Thank you. On the other side of the ball in this game, if you started Diontae Foreman this week, he might have been a big reason you were able to push through these buys this week. Over 100 yards from scrimmage and 3 touchdowns, 1 through the air, 2 on the ground. Darrington Evans was also involved on the ground as well, but Foreman was the guy. He did get hurt at the end of the game. He landed really, really hard on his hip. It didn't seem too serious, but just monitor that. Can't talk. But the Bears have the Chargers next week. So, will Roschon be back? Who knows? He's been in the concussion protocol, kind of like a scary amount of time for someone who has concussion. But, so now we're 2 weeks away potentially from Khalil Herbert coming back. That's when he's eligible. So we still have next week and the week after for these, replacement running backs to be able to be started. Okay, so I would keep Foreman on my roster, obviously, in case Roschon can't go next week. And also, you can't really cut Roschon either right now because it's possible that Foreman is hurt enough where he isn't too involved next week. So, unless we hear something where like, Foreman Foreman's good to go, right, next week. And then you're like, all right, well, this could be a timeshare. Do you see a scenario where Foreman is good to go next week, right? Roschon is cleared of the concussion protocol, and then it's all Roschon next week, right? Do you think that's a possible, or do you think that a best case scenario for Roschon is that this becomes just a split backfield next week?
I think that if they're both healthy, I think that we'll see a split. I don't know how attached they are to Diontae Foreman. He had a good week, but he was overproducing just a little bit for the work that he got. He's not going to be scoring 3 touchdowns on what he have. Like 17, 18 opportunities on the day, something like that. 21 opportunities, like 19 total. He had 3 catches and 16 carries. Overproduction, I think, is fair here, especially when you consider situation and game script. He was doing what he had to do. Obviously, it's great that he had that game, but it was a little bit of a case of overproduction, I think, when you look at it. So for me, I think that there isn't really a situation where Diontae Foreman takes over his backfield. Once Rashawn Johnson comes back, I think there's going to be a decent split involved. And I think because of that, Diontae Foreman becomes a little bit of a sell candidate here. And obviously, I don't know how many people are going to be in a market for Diontae Foreman, but they might turn around and look at it.
He's more of a throw-in.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah,
somebody who might need a running back next week. Like maybe you identify like the guy who has one of his running backs on bye, right? And he doesn't really have a good solid running back to start next week. I think if you throw Diontae Foreman to him in a trade tomorrow, like on Monday, like he might be inclined to accept it because he's like, oh, you know what? I could use someone in my running back 2 spot next week, right? But my question was more around Roschon because, Roschon, so 2 weeks ago, right, when we thought that he might have been cleared from that concussion, if he played that game, that would be before Diontae Foreman really got any work this year for the Bears, right? So it's possible that 2 weeks ago it could have been Roshan could have been the whole show.
It could have been the Rashawn Johnson
Right?
show. Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
It could have been the Roshan Johnson show. But now, like, even if Roshan's healthy going into this next week, I don't think it's going to be the Roshan Johnson show, right? I think that Diontae Foreman showed enough in this game to where, they're not just going to just, have him play, complete second fiddle to Roshan.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
They're not going to just throw him out in the rain after that. Because, he showed that he can be a solid running back in a rotation. And he can do it himself, too, if he has to. So I see your point there. That it's almost like that Kendre Miller argument that we were having earlier in the season. Like, he had the opportunity, but then he got hurt. He was never able to have that shot to establish himself, and now he's kind of stuck. Obviously, he's behind Kamara, but he's going to be part of, at best, a committee approach. And it's the same thing with Rashawn Johnson.
Exactly.
So I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
And it is a little bit of a shame.
It is because it kind of like reduced Roshan's upside while while Khalil Herbert's hurt.
Yeah.
Right. So
it's just the opportunity he wasn't able to capitalize. I hear you. Yeah, it just sucks.
Yeah. Exactly. So I guess my point is that if you it's not necessary to Roshan's a must start next week if he's active. You know what I mean? That's kind of what I'm getting at here. In case you're trying to decide do I need him on my roster? Is he a must keep? In most leagues he shouldn't be on the waivers, but because he will be picked up. But yeah. Anyway, so their quarterback Tyson Bagent, he wasn't terrible. Okay. And, most importantly, he was able to get the ball to DJ Moore. So that's good to know, right? He caught 8 for 59. So at least we know, he won't turn into a pumpkin. 8 for 59 isn't great. He did almost have a touchdown. It was on an end-around run type of play, in the red zone, inside the 10. But he didn't get the touchdown. So, he's still a high-end wide receiver 3 for me moving forward without Fields, if Fields can't play next week.
Yeah, and also, I don't know if you saw it, but there was also a play towards the end of the game. It was a fade to DJ Moore, and it was in his hands, but he had it knocked out at the end.
Oh, he dropped it.
He definitely,
dropped it. That's right.
Yeah, so he could have had a touchdown.
It was the back right corner of the end zone where it was in his hands, and he caught it, and the defender knocked it out.
Yeah, so it could be an even better day.
His quarterback did his job.
It was a high quality target. It wasn't just garbage at the line of scrimmage or anything. He was getting the targets that he needed, and the Bears are moving the ball. So that is one of the takeaways there. I mean, I'm not looking to start Tyson Bagent. I did pick him up in the one league just because I'm strapped for quarterbacks. But the fact that DJ Moore's going to continue to get those targets is at least a little bit encouraging.
The game I was looking forward to the least happened to be the game that was the best in the early windows, the Colts and the Browns, right? So we talked about Gardner Minshew, right? Breathing life into this Colts team. So 300 yards in 2 straight games. He ran 2 touchdowns in this week. He threw for another 2, okay? And that allowed Josh Downs, Michael Pittman to get it done. Pittman didn't get it going until that late 75-yard touchdown from Minshew, right? So if you had Pittman, you're just man, he can't get it done. But it was a tough matchup going in. We knew that, okay? But the fact that he was able to come through late 75-yard, he got it done for you. So you're happy.
Yep.
Josh Downs continues to see a high target share from Minshew, 26% target share today. The dude is still available in a ton of leagues, and he should have been picked up, to be honest with you. He's been on our waiver wire list forever now. So he'll be a top waiver wire pickup this week once again. Obviously with that high fantasy point total finally now for him, he's going to get picked up, right?
Yeah.
That's really what it took, right? We saw the opportunity and all that. It was there. All the underlying stuff was there. Now it's just flashing signs, go pick him up now. Now he's finally going to be picked up. But he's only rostered 30% of leagues, which was kind of surprising to me when I checked. But yeah, man, we have 2 fantasy relevant wide receivers here on the Colts at this point.
It's awesome, and nobody was expecting that, but that's the case. Going back to Josh Downs, opportunity will only get you rostered in 40 or 50% of leagues. Nobody cares about opportunity except for people like us. We look at it, we're oh, look at the usage that he's getting, and we'll go pick him up. Nobody will understand why we take him. And then he has this type of game. Now he's probably going to be rostered in 60 or 70% of leagues. I bet by the end of the week, people are going to be oh, yeah, look, here's a guy that we can have. And I'm sure he'll be quiet next week just because of that. But the point is, the 2 fantasy relevant wide receivers, they're both getting it done pretty consistently too. And obviously Michael Pittman, you're upset because he didn't have a humongous target share. He wasn't doing a whole lot till that last touchdown, but you also can't be mad because he came through for you at the end of the game, like you mentioned. Like, I'm breathing a sigh of relief more than I am angry if I have Michael Pittman. I'm just like, thank God he got that touchdown, because it wasn't a small touchdown. It's not like he caught a 6-yard touchdown, salvaged the day with like 10 or 11 fantasy points. Like 16 fantasy points is perfectly fine, especially like you're probably starting
in
him as
this
wide receiver
matchup.
too. Yeah, in this matchup.
In this matchup, you had low expectations. So when your wide receiver catches a 75-yard touchdown, like that's over exceeding your expectations in this matchup. Okay, especially you have Gardner Minshew starting. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is a good thing.
Yeah,
This is what you want.
it was supposed to be a fight for a wide receiver to get a touchdown in this game. We had two of them, and both of them had over 80 yards. So like it's great to see, and that's fine. So I think it's not only just good to see them do this from a fantasy perspective, but also just considering the matchup it was in, tells you that this isn't like a fluke. Not that anybody was calling it a fluke, but this can be sustainable in the long run with Gardner Minshew. And like you said, Gardner Minshew, he looks pretty good. If he's breathing life into this offense, you're definitely going to have a team that's going to be competitive down the stretch. Nobody's giving up on the team because I think they have enough talent. I like pieces on their defense too. I think that the Colts are a very good team. I would be happy to see them be a wild card, going in the playoffs if they could get things turned around.
Minshew mania, baby. Minshew mania.
It's happening.
Let's see. So, by the way, we're still seeing a split in the Colts backfield. 50-50 split in terms of snaps. Both had 18 carries, but JT saw 3 more targets. First big game we've seen from JT in a while, though. 75 yards rushing with a touchdown, another 45 yards through the air. It seems like Zach Moss he might continue to be startable as a flex play.
And we talked about like just getting absolutely as much as you can, just really milking that cow, trying to get as many points out of him as you can. And I'm doing that in our one league. Like I said this last week. I say it pretty much every week. I'm like, man, I can't believe I'm still getting production from Zach Moss. Obviously, 7 points isn't fantastic, but I'll take it because he's my flex. He's my emergency flex, and 7 points is fine. He's definitely a flex at best at this point, and we knew that Jonathan Taylor at some point was going to take over the backfield and just be the guy. That's probably still going to happen, but it doesn't look like the offense is going to be that bad where you have to sit there and just like leave Zach Moss off your roster. You're not going to be dropping him. I think that there's enough there. He's a good enough handcuff too that if anything would happen to Jonathan Taylor, he could be right back to that workhorse role in no time.
Moving to the Pats-Bills game, it was nice to see James Cook gain like a significant lead in the backfield this week in terms of opportunities. But it was a 50-50 split in terms of snaps between him and Latavius Murray, and it was a 50-50 split in terms of routes run. Not ideal. Dude, in what world should James Cook be running the same number of routes as Latavius Murray? You know what I'm saying? Like, this is
not this one, but it's real.
We're not talking about like, Naheem Hines or like J.D. McKissick or like, these really good pass-catching satellite backs, right? We're not talking about those guys, okay? We're talking about Latavius Murray, okay? The dude's like 6'5", dude's like 6'5", like 230, like the dude 240 maybe. Like the dude should not be running routes all the time. So I really don't get it. But Damian Harris, he's on IR, right? Cook did end up with 76% of the backfield's rushing share. That's good, right? At least that's not 50-50. So this could end up being up and down, just like we've seen all year with this opportunity. We talked about, Stephon Diggs potentially being limited as well, and he was because the Patriots do a good job of shutting down number 1 wide receivers. But he did come down with a touchdown. He came through regardless, and he worked hard to get that touchdown for us. Okay, because he ended up not getting touched when he caught the ball. He got up, ran into the end zone, so that was good to see. What are you making out of James Cook here? Like, how encouraging is this for you? Is he kind of like just kind of in that same bucket that he was in coming in? Do you feel like you could get some value out of him since he ended up, scoring in this game? He had a receiving touchdown, right, in this game, so he did get the fantasy points on the game log. Are you looking to move him right now? Because I'm not sure if we're going to be seeing this type of production consistently.
Yeah, that's kind of the issue. You're not going to see this type of production consistently, but you look at the past 2 games before this one, they were both single-digit outputs, but then the 4 games before that, it was pretty consistent. And the workload for him hasn't really changed this season that much. Obviously, the rushing share has been up and down, but the production is definitely something. You're not totally upset starting him. He has his signature, like 12 to 17 rushes. He has a couple targets a game. Like, I'm perfectly happy holding on to that as my RB2. Like, that type of workload, we can get days like this where he's pretty good. He had almost 20 points. Nothing wrong with that. But there's also going to be days where he gets 7. But if he's going to be right in that middle ground of like 12 to 14, which is where he's been for most of the season, like I'm okay with that. Like, I didn't draft him to be my RB1. Hopefully you didn't have to do that. There was a lot of hype coming in the season that he might be able to do that. It doesn't look like that's going to be the case this season. But he's not a bad fantasy asset at all. Like, if you can move him and upgrade, great. He's not somebody where you have to think about, is he going to be an asset a week from now? Or is his value going to be like drastically higher or lower a week or two from now? Like, I don't think you have to worry about that. He's going to be a pretty relatively consistent in that bucket, like you mentioned, as a mid to low RB2 with a little bit upside every week, depending on how the offense does. I'm not changing the way I view him at all just because of this matchup, because he did just fine, and I think he's going to continue to be that just fine moving forward. So I'm just keeping him as my RB2, not thinking twice about it. I'm all right with what he's done.
Okay, sounds good. If you guys aren't subscribed to the podcast, if you're not following it, or if you haven't added it to the list of podcasts that you subscribe to on your podcast app, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, please do so. It helps us out so much. It doesn't cost you anything. This podcast is completely free. So if you could do that, they'll help us out a ton. It'll just get people to like discover a podcast and just spread it out a little bit more, as the season progresses. So we greatly appreciate that. Also, I wanted to make sure you guys knew about our website. All these takeaways are going to be up on the website, but the one thing that I wanted to highlight, there was 2 things actually. One is that, our waiver wire rankings are going to be up on Monday, so you can go check that out, our early waiver wire rankings, and then we update them, on Tuesday, obviously, as we get more information. I will also have a waiver wire article with fab recommendations. Tyler will also have his waiver wire article as well. That was the first thing that I wanted to talk about, but the second thing was that what Zach is working on and what he's kind of been the mastermind of, this season and, in the offseason too, is that's the fantasy newsletter that we've been putting out every single day, okay, for free in your email inbox. And, we've gotten some really good reviews on it. We've gotten great feedback, from you guys, so we've improved it, as you guys have sent us messages and that sort of thing. But, overall, the people really like that the newsletter that they get every single day, because, it's entertaining, it has stats, it also helps you win and kind of gives you informed decisions every single day to your inbox. So you can go to the website, upperhandfantasy.com, scroll all the way down, you can enter your email to join the newsletter. Not only that, though, we have the rankings up there, the articles. Rest of season rankings are fully updated. They're going to be updated every single week by me and Tyler. Also, we already have our dynasty rankings updated as well. Haven't updated those since before the season. So if you want to check out those dynasty rankings, they're up, fully updated this week on upperhandfantasy.com. All right, there you go. Just wanted to plug those real quick before we continue. The Giants offense, they looked halfway decent with Tyrod Taylor, behind center, with Saquon Barkley back, right, over the last 2 weeks. Saquon with another 24 touches, over 100 yards from scrimmage and a touchdown in the receiving game. Darren Waller, finally, he had his best game of the season, 7 catches on 8 targets for 98 yards and a touchdown. This is more like it, right? Like, he was the clear focal point of the passing game, 28% target share. This is what you wanted to see, okay? And, like, I'm hoping that when Daniel Jones ends up coming back, that, this can continue. And I'm hoping that Saquon can be that cog, of this offense, right? Like, and get things going. Jalen Hyatt also, he got a near full-time role last week, and it continued this week. We talked about it, right? He was one of my Hail Mary starts this week. And he was on his way to a huge receiving game, right? If he caught that long touchdown that he almost brought down with one hand, that would have been sick. But he still already had 2 catches for 75 yards in this game. The big playability is there, so that's something to keep an eye on, moving forward. I think Hyatt should be picked up at this point because he has that big playability, and I do think this Giants offense is, finding a little bit of a groove. And over the last 2 weeks with him back, he's made a couple plays where you kind of have to pay attention to him.
Yeah, and just to clarify something you said earlier, you're hoping that can happen when Daniel Jones comes back. You're hoping Daniel Jones comes back?
I'm not. That's not what I said. That's not what I said.
Tyrod Taylor.
That's not what I said. Quarterback
he's
controversy.
Good. Yeah. You can't have a controversy because Daniel Jones, he's getting paid way too much, and that sucks. I mean, Tyrod Taylor has been pretty good. You know, he's solid, pretty good quarterback. It's just unfortunate situations. Like everyone points to that Chargers incident where he had the team doctor messed up some injection he was doing to hurt him, and then he never got to play in Los Angeles. Tyrod Taylor's pretty good. And you mentioned Jalen Hyatt being that Hail Mary play. His skill set, just burning right past the defender, you know, it matches perfectly. Have you seen some of the throws Tyrod Taylor's throwing out there? Like his deep passing is like pinpoint. Like I can't believe some of the passes that he puts out there. It's like Daniel Jones could never, at least when I watch the games. And Tyrod Taylor too, if you started him.
Back in the day, you remember the Sammy Watkins days when these two were together in Buffalo? Like Tyrod was giving some of the prettiest deep balls to Sammy Watkins, man. You know, so like I remember those days. But like Tyrod's like 30. How old is he? Like 35, 36? Like he's an old quarterback, dude, and like he's getting it done. So good for him.
He's 34.
Okay,
yeah,
sorry.
But if you start him too, you're pretty happy. He had 21 points. He's a top 5 quarterback right now. Now he's probably not going to be after Sunday Night Football, which is going on just started. But he's going to be a top 8 quarterback this week, I would say, pretty safely, because 279 yards and 2 touchdowns, a little 8 carries, 25 yards, sprinkle that right in. Like that's Daniel Jones-esque. That's like what we were hoping to see from Daniel Jones this season. That's kind of how he got by. Tyrod Taylor's doing the same thing.
Yeah, man. We saw Commanders rookie running back Chris Rodriguez get involved a little bit last week, and then he led the Commanders in rushing yards this week. He had 7 carries. Brian Robinson had 8 carries. This is not good for Brian Robinson. Okay, a few weeks ago, Robinson was the guy on early downs. Antonio Gibson wasn't challenging him at all in the run game, and that was great for Robinson because he could be like the clear early down guy. And so he becomes very startable as like this touchdown dependent RB2. We'll take it. But now he has another problem that can limit his work if Rodriguez continues to be involved here, right? So something to keep in mind, moving forward. Robinson was the clear guy in terms of snap share in this game compared to Rodriguez, but not in terms of opportunities.
Yeah, and it's also worth mentioning, like, it wasn't like a negative game script where the game was totally out of reach and there was no reason to run the ball, but they were down, for the entire game. I'm not worried about Brian Robinson because this is kind of what he's been doing all season. He's had that 8 points, like just roughly this season for the past few weeks. He had that one good week. I think it was week 1. But outside of that, week 2. Sorry, it was against the Broncos of all teams. But since then, he's been pretty much like standard rate, low RB2, high RB3. And he hasn't had a whole lot of scoring upside either. The Commanders' offense doesn't look that good. So this is only going to hurt him. I'm not really interested in starting him unless I have to, and I say that I'm not interested in starting him because I have to is because I have to in my one league. That's the only reason I'm saying.
The problem here is that his upside before this Chris Rodriguez entering the fray situation was that he had, like, if the Commanders were in a neutral or positive game script, he had the upside to have 25 carries in a game, and then plus any goal line work that comes along. But now, if Chris Rodriguez is going to get close to 50% of the carries potentially, we're talking about his ceiling being like 17, 18 carries, like complete ceiling. You know what I'm saying? And that's not ideal. And like most likely, he won't be even getting that if Chris Rodriguez is going to be somewhat involved. And Rodriguez was more efficient than him in the rushing game too this week. So like that doesn't help him either.
Who isn't more efficient than Brian Robinson?
There you go.
Let's just have that conversation.
Now you're talking, Zach.
But yeah, just it looks like, hopefully this doesn't happen, but it looks like there's definitely that threat now of this becoming a true committee. Like we knew there was the early down role and the passing role to have in the Commanders' backfield, but now there's a third guy mixing in. It's like you're really not going to want any piece of it.
Yeah, exactly. We were all wondering where Bijan Robinson was today, right? Like we were all wondering. Twitter was really trying to figure out what the hell was going on, right? I couldn't figure it out. Everybody was like tweeting at Arthur Smith during the game, like he checks Twitter. Tyler Algier, Cordell Patterson, they were going back and forth in this game, and Bijan wasn't showing up. He had 2 total snaps in the first half, and then 11 total for the game. And then we find out what really happened. He had a headache, Zach. He had such a bad headache the night before that he told Arthur Smith, Arthur Smith said, hey, it's probably better that you don't play this week. I wish I knew about this.
We'll let you suit up anyway.
Exactly. It's like, why don't you tell us about this, right? Because how much money was riding on whether Bijan Robinson played or not? So they decided to keep that in-house for whatever reason. This is not cool at all, man. This is not cool at all. Like if they knew about this situation, I feel like the teams have an obligation to report it. The teams have an obligation to let people know, especially if the NFL is going to be in cahoots with DraftKings, going to be in cahoots with FanDuel, right? DraftKings is an official partner of the NFL. DraftKings is not going to be happy about this. Okay, neither are all the people that
feels like collusion.
Right? Like, come on, dude. This cannot happen, okay? He said that he's going to be good for next week, but who knows? Maybe this headache will linger to week 8. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. But, like, it's not ideal. Like, hopefully this isn't, like, a concussion-related thing. Hopefully this is just, like a migraine. Actually, I don't know if I wish a migraine. Like, I don't want to even wish a migraine.
Yeah.
Even the migraines are fucking terrible. But still, like, I hope it's a bad headache. I hope it went away. I hope he's fine.
Yeah. I mean, maybe his tummy will hurt next week, and he'll take more snaps and pop up shitter than he does on the field next week. Obviously I'm joking too, but I'm sure, I wouldn't want to go run into a pile of 8 to 12, roughly 300 some odd pound dudes if my head hurt too. I'm not getting paid millions of dollars to do it, but I probably wouldn't feel like doing that either. So it's fine. You're right. It wasn't so much the fact that he wasn't feeling well, but it's just nobody said anything. It pisses me off. Like, I'm so happy I didn't have any, like, anytime touchdown scorer parlays out there where it's like Bijan was one of the legs, because I would have been pissed, like, really bad. Like, Bijan couldn't have updated his Facebook status or something, the headache, just to let us know that we would be incurring the wrath of Tyler Algier this week. I don't know. It was just a pain. I didn't like seeing that either. I had him in my one league. He put up 0.3 points. I don't know what was the point of them giving him that one carry at the end of the game. Even once, like, the game was over, there was no reason to put him out there and just like, here's your 0.3 of a point. Enjoy. He had 3 yards. Just really disappointing.
Emari Demercado was the guy for the Cardinals this week. This is what should have happened last week, but instead they went with Ingram. And this week Ingram was relegated to special teams. Okay, he didn't play on offense. So, and Demercado played well, man. 13 carries for 58 yards. He caught 4 or 5 targets on 78% of snaps. So this will do while James Conner is out. So if he was dropped, go ahead and pick him up. He has at least 2 more games without James Conner, and since he's primarily receiving running back, you can kind of, and who can still get it done on the ground, you can kind of like expect a relatively high floor, especially in PPR. So, no other Cardinals running back saw more than 1 carry. Rondale Moore saw 4 carries, and he's a wide receiver. So this is good news for Demercado moving forward while Conner's out.
Yep. So last week it was Diontae Ingram, and this week it's Demercado. Like, I'm not saying that's going to keep flipping back and forth like that, but Emari Demercado was a guy that we said would be the guy, and I think this is much closer to what we should expect to see moving forward. Obviously, it's only 2 more weeks, so don't expect this guy to come in and be like a staple in your fantasy lineup every week. But you also mentioned Rondale Moore. Like, he is the definition of gadget player, like, at this point. That's just what they're using him to do. He's not going to get any consistent workload. Of course, he had his one big game against my team, the Cowboys, but I'm just going to let that slide. I'm not expecting too much from any of the players, really, on the Cardinals. The offense hasn't looked as good recently, but Emari Demercado, he's going to be a volume play based on what he's getting in the receiving game, like you mentioned, not the ground game. And that's going to be enough to have him be a flex. He's going to be right in that range, I'd say. I don't want to say with James Cook, but he's getting a similar type workload if he gets the same type of stuff that he got today.
Yeah, if you're looking for someone to replace Brian Robinson in your lineup, he's the guy.
Yeah, he has more upside, arguably, I would say.
For sure. And I have to say, man, what George Pickens did this week was really impressive. Diontae Johnson was back. Pickens out-targeted him 8-6 and outperformed him 107 to 79 yards. And I've been on Team Diontae, but this was an impressive performance, I have to say. Okay, Pickens also had yet another amazing catch on the sideline that didn't count. Yet another one. He has at least one of those every single week. But I wanted to sell Pickens last week. We'll see if that was a good call or not. As we continue on, I think this was a relatively tough matchup for perimeter wide receivers. And the fact that the Rams played a lot of zone and George Pickens still came through, I think that says something about Pickens, evolving? No. Evolution of his game.
Yes, that's the word.
There we go. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm not jumping ship on the Diontae Johnson boat just because this was his first game back. I still think Diontae Johnson is going to be the guy to get the targets. But maybe there's a case to be made that it's not just the Diontae Johnson show and George Pickens and everybody in the rest in a barrel below them. I think that it could bounce back and forth. I'm not going to say like Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. I don't think they're quite as good as duo. But in terms of the workload that each of them could see each week, George Pickens could be up there because it does seem like Kenny Pickett likes to throw to George Pickens, and that Pickett to Pickens connection is more than just in the name. Like it's actually on the field too.
Yeah, yeah, and you know what? It is worth noting that like he did not run like he wasn't a full time player. Like he ran like just a few less routes than George Pickens this week. So he
Right.
might not be at like maybe they wanted to not give him like the full workload as soon as he came back his first week, but we should expect him to be like fully back next week. I mean, I would consider this game and the amount of routes he ran and that sort of thing for him to be fully back. I would say. I think one of the good calls I think I made last week was buying Puka Nacua after his down game. He led the Rams in targets with 12. Kupp had 7, and he caught 8 of them for 154 yards. Okay, the dude was balling out. He made some really impressive catches, especially that toe tap on the sideline, dude. Like that toe tap, like with the one he had to reach up and get in between two defenders and got the toe down. Like that right there,
Take a hit.
take a
Yep.
hit. Like that right there, like he's legit, dude. Like when you see that play, you're like, oh, okay. Like this dude is legit.
Yeah, and it's just I love watching him play, and it just keeps saying. And I said this, I think, since the beginning of the season where he just started doing that. Obviously, nobody saw this coming. I'm not going to say that I saw this coming. And act like Puka Nacua was the guy that I had tagged, and I knew that this would be the case. But he looks like Cooper Kupp, like making those catches, the contested catches. But also, did you see him? Anytime he's coming across the field on like a drag, he turns up the field, and he's fast. Like he turns on the jets and he goes. Like this is a top flight wide receiver. He's a wide receiver one on an offense that has two of them. Is Matthew Stafford a quarterback? It still blows me away that the Rams lost this game. Obviously, there was controversy at the end of the game because Kenny Pickett didn't reach the first down line, but they got it anyway because of a bad spot. Rams couldn't challenge, but it just blows me away the Steelers are still winning games. Like I don't know how they do this because they never look well oiled on offense. And they were a little bit better, granted, in this game today, but it just blows me away that they're winning these games. I know their defense is good, but it's just it's blowing me away. I can't believe it. The Rams, I thought, had this one easy.
The offense coming back, this week out of the bye, I think they looked a lot better. So I think they did make some changes. Good for them. That's what we want because we want. I mean, like not that I have any of Najee Harris rostered, but like we would like some more output from that backfield. We would like Diontae Johnson to be Diontae Johnson. We want George Pickens to be fantasy relevant. So we want this to happen. So let's continue it. Maybe Kenny Pickett. He looked good today, and he looked a lot better than he did. This past season. But he only had Diontae Johnson for like half a game in week 1, and then after that he didn't have him. And Pat Fryermuth also on IR the rest of for basically the whole year so far. So there you go. I think the big takeaway from this game was this backfield in Los Angeles. Darrell Henderson and Royce Freeman. They were the two primary backs. We got word earlier today, in the middle of the night actually, from Adam Schefter, who never sleeps, that Zach Evans was just going to back these guys up, and he barely played. Henderson was the 1A. Freeman was the 1B. Freeman did have some good runs as well. He ended up being more efficient than Henderson, but Henderson was the one who ended up getting the goal line touchdown. Both of these guys had a goal line snap each. Okay, so that's worth keeping in mind. But Henderson ended up with the goal line touchdown. He is the guy I would say he would be the top waiver wire pickup for me between these two guys. You got to keep in mind that Royce Freeman was on this team. Well, he was in the practice squad playing in like NFL football. Darrell Henderson was not. He was in another league. Okay, so he came back and just split it right away. So I can see next week him getting even more work potentially, or a higher share of the work. So he's obviously one of the top waiver wire pickups this week. He had 20 opportunities today. Right, that's pretty good for someone who just got signed. Keep in mind that the Rams do have the Cowboys next week in Dallas. Not great. But then they have a great matchup against Green Bay before the bye. So he'll have another opportunity after the bye as well against Seattle, since Kyren Williams won't be eligible to come back from IR until week 12 against Arizona.
Yep. Darrell Henderson looked like Darrell Henderson. That's what he's been doing. He came back from the Rams. He wasn't on the team. He comes back and he looks like Darrell Henderson. Like he's going to be the guy. And it was nice. This was one of those situations where the backfield, they clarified it for us before the game. Adam Schefter comes out and says Darrell Henderson's going to be a starter. And he did. That's what he was. He got that. So that's good. But Royce Freeman was also part of the picture. I'm not too worried about him being like some guy that really eats in his workload. I think we saw the best of what we're going to get from Royce Freeman any given week. I do think that the matchup isn't as bad as it looks on paper against the Cowboys because as a Cowboys fan, I can tell you Dallas is not that good against defending the run. If you can get a run game going, you can actually have some success against them. But I don't think that there's anything to worry about in terms of the matchup. I think it's going to be probably a high-scoring game next week, and that's going to make Darrell Henderson, even in a relatively tough matchup, startable. So I'm okay starting him next week. I don't really have any reservations, and this performance going into it just makes me feel even better about it. So I think that he should be a waiver wire pickup. If you didn't, nobody picked him up in your leagues. I know he's sitting on a waiver wire in a lot of mine, except for the one that you were in because I think you grabbed him, right?
I did. I mean, a lot of people were asking me in the comments in Instagram, like, hey, like, who should I pick up off of waivers, like, before these games start? I said, go pick up Darrell Henderson. Because there's a lot of signs pointing to him being the potential Kyren Williams replacement. So if you guys saw that and you listened to it and you saw my Instagram stories about it, I hope you did. So you have him on your roster already. You don't have to spend up the fab. So I hope that happened. I think that's going to do it for this episode, guys. We appreciate you. Thank you for listening. Thanks for all the support. We are 7 weeks in to the NFL season. We got a long way to go, but we're having fun. And I hope you are too. I hope you're winning. And if you're not winning, hopefully the winning starts picking up here. And we'll see you tomorrow. Back on a waiver wire episode. Take it easy. See ya.